I listened to a podcast with Toby Lutke, who is the CEO of Shopify. So Shopify makes technology so you can set up your own online store very easily, to compete with Amazon. And I heard a podcast, and my intuition at the time was, gotta have shares of Shopify. This guy is a visionary.
That topic that you brought about using the two sides of the brain, I think that this is the thing that people have to remember. It's a balance to find, and this balance has to be also trained and respected. You cannot just remove the human part of the people because you're a data guy.
Think about that enough. How can you train that? And I think it's the same as with everything. I mean, if you start riding a bike, you have to train, you have to do it again and again and again until you're good at it. And it can take time. And I think the same thing goes for your creative side and your human connection side and all those softer skills.
This is why it's important to continue to work and even to train that creative side of our brain.
Hello, Soufyan. I think, knowing you, knowing myself, I think we have to confess something, that we are both data junks. We love data. We really, the more data, the better. And at the same time, I think that concept in business and more specific in finance is also a danger. But because I think that if you only look at data, you lose information, and very good information. So I think that people should use both sides of their brain in finance. It's often, a bit taboo to say that because, data is the only real science. And at the same time, I think it's very interesting to go against that trend because it can really propel your career, your results to a much higher level. Because I think the data must always be there. The interpretation of the data is, I think, something that is not always focused on enough. Do you agree?
Totally. I totally agree with you. I think it's important to consider the human in you. I mean, the data is the logical part, and it's clearly the base of our work in finance or in any data work. The thing is, what you make out of it, just like you said, has to be thought of. And in this thinking process, you need to bring your creativity. I mean, the best decisions in lives weren't brought by data itself. Otherwise, we would just have we would not have had revolutions in companies, in business, or even in society in general. I mean, people had to think about something else, and it was not based on trends. It was based on something that was not considered before. And this creative process is clearly the main differentiator between you and an Excel file, for example. The Excel will not think of a solution, will not think of the next steps, and will clearly not think about how appealing your work must be to make you shine.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that I always think of, if I go back to that concept of using your total brain and not just the data part of it, or the scientific or the objective part, or whatever you want to call it, is if you look at the data from psychology, there's about 10% of all the knowledge that we have that is conscious. 90% is unconscious. So things we don't think about. So, but when you came into this room, you had a feeling of that room, right? That's not something you consciously think about, but it is there. And if you use all the unconscious data as well, I think that it's data again. In that way as well, and I think that it can really help you make a better qualifications of the hard data. Then
yes, clearly. I had this thought of successful people. They have what we call the gut feeling. They do not need the data; they know it and they know by experience what's good and what's not, what will bring this outcome A, what brings the outcome B, and they know beforehand what they have to do, and the data is just there to help them, and the data would justify their decision, their gut feeling. If the data, confirms it, it gives them more assurance about what they decided. If it infirms it, if it contradicts it, they will either reconsider or learn with the experience or challenge the data by other experiences that they've had. But generally, people and successful people will need the data just to have a backup, have a sort of strengthen their decisions. And that's why I think that I do not say you just have to work based on your guts. It's clearly not what I want to say, because our work is there to make sure that people take into account the data that we bring. And that's why it's important for data people, finance or any other, even marketing, for example, to not only bring data, but also bring the story behind, just to make sure that you touch the guts of the people. You don't touch their brain in that case. And that's why it's not the right side that will be considered with the data, but you touch the left side of your brain, of the brain of the audience, by playing on their emotions. And in that case, you can turn their guts, because you do not face the wrong side of the brain. You touch the one that will be impacted.
I also think about, I think it was Stan Druckenmiller, I think about one of those investing legends. I think it was Stan Druckenmiller, and he said, when my back hurts, I know I have to check. I don't know what it is, but each time my back hurts, something's wrong. And each time he finds something, and that, has saved him like billions in his case, just because of that physical. And he says, I only get it like every few years, but if my back hurts, something is really wrong, and I have to look at my portfolio. That's a very extreme example, but he says, I've been investing for so long, and I know that I should not ignore that. So I think that's a very extreme example, of course, but I think that people should not be ashamed to use, even weird, strange things like that, signals that, if you are a professional and you have been doing your job for a long time, I think your gut feeling is actually really a very, very, very valuable source of information that should not be ignored at all. And, data and, call it gut feeling, call it insight. Maybe that's a synonym, right? Insight. And it's like everything in life. If you want to have a good relation with a partner, you have to have balance, right? And I think here is the same thing. You have to have the balance between the data and, the other data, so the softer data. And I think one of the reasons it's not valued enough is because it's probably right now impossible to quantify it, because Stan Druckenmiller can say that because he's a billionaire. Yeah. He can say, "Oh, my back hurts, something's wrong." But if you're an employee and you go to your CFO and say, "Oh, my back hurts, something's wrong," I think you will be the laughingstock of the company.
When you said that, I had this image of when I was a finance business partner. I had this marketing manager who I had to work with to perform the budget. I remember this marketing manager who I had to work with to establish the budgets or work on the forecast. And she often said to me, "I don't feel it." And at that moment, it irritated me, because I said, you don't have to feel it. You just need to understand what the figures say, and you just need to accept that your feeling is wrong. But now with the time, I understand how wrong I was.
Yeah.
Because eventually she was right after.
And it's also a sign of courage that she dares to say that, because that's usually, not accepted. Like you yourself had the same reaction of, come on, this is not how it should be. But I think it's very, very valuable, and I think that there should be a counter reaction to the so-called objective culture. I say so-called because there are biases everywhere.
No one is objective.
The biggest biases that you have are your own biases, because you don't even see them. You're not aware. You think you're objective, but you're not.
No one is objective. You have your experience, you have your life, you have your knowledge, you have your hidden spots. So
how you feel? You maybe you have a hangover, or you met the woman of your life, or you became a parent, or what have you.
Or you just have a bad day, and it happens. And this is why it's important to consider what the other person is living. And that's why I think that when I said that it's a differentiator between us and an Excel file, well, today it's even more important, because it's the differentiator between you and AI. For example, AI will clearly be better at us than us at analyzing figures, at bringing new information, bringing new insights. But the way to consider it, the way to use it, we have to take this advantage, because otherwise, in some years, we won't be relevant anymore. So this is why it's important to continue to work and even to train that creative side of our brain. We will have gut feelings in the future. That's for sure. But the data will be even more analyzed, the information will be even more available, and even more quickly than today. We will not be able to compete on that area with artificial intelligence. But where we do have a chance is to invest even more in our human side, and that goes through communication, that goes through art, or creativity, or the way to present things. And I'm not only speaking about presentations, but even if you think of a financial model, for example. I mean, this is the purest technical work you do in finance. But it can also be some work of art, if you think about that.
Yeah, I think about this kind of cash flow model, for example. It's only your own input that will, define the output. And I think, one of the criteria, or probably the most important criteria I use for potential multi-baggers, my service, to pick stocks, is using my whole brain, as we were talking about, is judging the CEO of a company. Is that CEO a really visionary CEO? I mean, if you look at Amazon, for example, there were thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of online shops, and hundreds of thousands failed. Amazon didn't. And why? That's only because of Jeff Bezos. And that's one of the things that I really look at right now. Well, I've been doing that for years, in fact, and I started that in 2017, and it's a good one, so I can tell this. I listened to a podcast with Toby Lutke, who is the CEO of Shopify. So Shopify makes technology so you can set up your own online store very easily, and to compete with Amazon on your own website. And I heard a podcast, and my intuition at the time was, first my intuition said, I've got to have shares of Shopify. This guy is a visionary. And then I looked at the stock and I looked at the valuation, and it was crazily overvalued. So normally that would have been, okay, buy Shopify. And what I did then was, no, I'm just going to follow my gut feeling, because this guy is really different. I heard him on that podcast, and he just thinks differently. He's wired differently, and he will succeed. I'm 100% sure of that. So I will invest. So it's more than a 10 bagger right now, Shopify, and you know what? It's still crazily overvalued, but you know the stock has gone up more than 10x, and that's I think that was for me the lesson to learn there, that my brain is actually quite good at judging people, and those people made the companies, and those people are the ones that drive the company in a certain direction, and you know all the rest is the consequence of those people leading the way and showing the way, and I think that you can apply this lesson to much more in finance.
Mm-hmm. That's the typical example of a decision that turned out to be good after, even though everything that you had at your disposition at that time would have would have said, don't do it. And the example of the marketing manager I had to work with was also an example of someone feeling it or not feeling it. Mm-hmm. And that's crazy, because what we have with data often in our work is that we have to think about the future. And in that sense, it's important to remain humble and think about the fact that nobody knows what will happen. We make projections, we make calculations, we use trends, we use arithmetic, and we use statistics, and we use averages to make sure that we have the strongest possible model. But eventually, we take a guess as well.
Yes, and I think that's one of the things that I talk about so much, that, you know, for when analysts come out with a target price for a stock, that's completely ridiculous, because, you know, first, it's supposed to project the stock price 1 year out. You never know what the stock market in general will do, and that will have a huge impact on the stock price of that particular company. And then secondly, they're just guessing for the numbers. And how do they know those? Well, they just take a guess, and that's it. And I have no problem with that as such, because, you know, we all make guesses. And I think those guesses as such can be very valuable, because they show a way, they show a different view on the reality there. And at the same time, I think the problem is that those analysts, and you know, those analysts are just an example for broader things, are just too certain. They don't say, this is what I think. No, they say, this is it. Mm-hmm. And that's a problem, I think. I think if we are, you know, aware of the fact that our projections, we try to make them as objective as possible, but are still very, very, very subjective. I think that part should tell you that we should use our complete brain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in that case, for example, when you spoke about that made me think about something, and I know a bit your position on that. For cryptos, mm-hmm. for example, mm-hmm. this is typically the kind of products that you don't know how it will evolve, because there are no certainties in the calculations. There are no certainties on how to value their progression, and so.
But in fact, the same is true for companies.
Yeah.
Yeah, crypto is more extreme in the same way, but you cannot, you can make projections for companies. But a DCF, discounted cash flow, it goes out 10 years in the future. How would you know? Because mostly they cannot even project the next quarter correctly. So how about the next, 10 years? It's impossible. And also a discounted cash flow, it stops and it goes to the perpetual growth rate after 10 years. Why? I mean, if you look at the best companies, they grow for much more, for much longer. Mm-hmm. And I think that, again, DCF, it's not that I'm against DCFs. I think they're they can be extremely valuable, but they should just be one data point, which should be, you know, in the total context of an analysis, and not, you know, the 50% of the analysis. Just like one data point, like maybe 5% or 3% of the total analysis. And I think that's the problem with discounted cash flows, that they are presented as too certain. And I think that is, in finance in general, one of the problems with that.
I was thinking about something, because here we talk a lot about work, self, but I have one of the things I have in mind is that in order to train your creativity, because it's part of the brain, it's a muscle, you have to train it, and in the logical part, it's obvious how you can train it, but in the creative part, how would you do it? How do you train it? You cannot just practice it at work.
Yes, and that's a great question. I think that people don't think about that enough. How can you train that? And I think it's the same as with everything. I mean, if you start riding a bike, you know, you have to train. You have to do it again and again and again until you're good at it. And it can take time. And I think the same thing goes for, you know, your creative side and your human connection side and all those softer skills. You have to train them again and again and again. And I'm thinking, like, you know, an actor, for example, if they have a character that they have to play, they keep training and training and training until it's consistent, and the body language is consistent. You know, body language is such a thing that so many people don't pay attention to, and it's so critical to convince people. You know, the studies say that about 85 to 90% of what you say is not what you say, but the way in which you say it. And, you know, the way you use your voice, for example, is a part of that. If I say, Soufyan, I'm angry,
Yeah,
right?
I'm already
if I say,
scared.
Soufyan? Yeah, where are you? You know, right? So I say the same word, but the message is completely different. And I think that's one of the things that you should really practice. You should train your voice, your intonation. And you know, if you look at babies, for example, a baby is already trained, pre-trained actually, from, you know, if the next baby you see, do a test, right? And you say to the baby, "Hi, baby, how are you?" What will the reaction be? Nothing. So what do you do? Because the baby already knows that high voice means you're interested, and so the interest will come back. And I think if you know that, I think it shows how important it is and how you can train it. And if you have important messages, you should say them louder and higher, as I just did. So, and you can really train that. Listen to yourself, do it again and again and again, you know, with a limited set of sentences that you can say. And that's just one example. I think if you go to intuition, for example, gut feeling, how can you train that? I think it just is the same thing. You have to do it for years, and then you will see patterns. And I think it's key to really look up the patterns, so to recognize them. Oh yeah, I have seen that before. That visionary CEO, for example, I've seen that before. I've seen Steve Jobs, I've seen Jeff Bezos, I've seen, you know, many other great CEOs who had the same drive. And I think one of the things you should do is just look at people and how they are and what effect they have on you. I mean, when I heard Toby Lutke talk in that podcast, you know, I really became enthusiastic about it. Now, the same thing will be true for his employees, of course, because if he can make me enthusiastic, he will definitely make his own employees enthusiastic as well, and investors. And I think that, you know, recognizing the pattern is crucial there. Recognizing and then repeating and training yourself to get better at it.
What you said about charismatic people, you also have the bad face of the medal, because many entrepreneurs, many CEOs were super charismatic. You could trust them. Many people invested in them because they trusted the way they had that drive, the way they considered their companies, the way they envisioned the future, to eventually have frauds. People who disappointed them, people who were completely frauds. Like, I don't know if you remember the guy from the FTX.
Yes, Sam Altman, I think. Isn't it Altman as well? Just like the CEO of...
No, he had a two-name thing.
Yeah.
I don't
Friedman.
Yes,
Sam Friedman.
something like that.
No, that guy.
Many others who were frauds. So I think that's why we really want to go back to what you said. You cannot only use one part of the brain. You cannot only use that trust. You cannot only use that gut feeling. You need evidences as well. And it's important in the case of the FTX, for example, like, he was super charismatic. People really loved him. He had a vision about how cryptos were going to work. But if people only knew that the accounting was done on QuickBooks, well, for such a company,
yes,
that was super risky.
Yeah.
And it's key to remember that you have to challenge.
Yes, and I think that what you say now is probably the reason why intuition has such a bad reputation. Because those kind of things, if you only follow your intuition, you're wrong a lot. Because, probably you'll have 50% losers in investing at least. But when I go back to Shopify, I was very enthusiastic about the CEO, and I looked at everything from the company and I analyzed everything, and everything was great except for the valuation. And that part is crucial as well. Again, it's balance. You have to have both, and you cannot only use data, because you can be a data fool, and you cannot have only intuition, because then you're just plainly a fool. So it's so important to have both. And I think that in finance, we have to acknowledge the fact that intuition has its role as well. And I think in finance, it's more oppressed, to put it that way. And I also think about something else now. I don't know if you know the book Range by David Epstein.
No, never heard.
It's a fantastic book, and he looks at great innovators over time. And think of Einstein. Think of Steve Jobs. Think of very creative, innovative people.
Da Vinci, for example.
Yeah, good example. What you see is that very often they take knowledge from their broad range of interests. That's the title, of course, range, the broad range of their interests. And then they transfer the concepts from those things to their own, industry or company. And I think that's a lesson to learn. I think that is soft power as well. Recognizing that something has been done in a certain niche and transferring it to your own niche. And I think that has a lot to do with intuition and recognizing the patterns as well. So it's not just intuition, of course, but if you train yourself to recognize those patterns, I think that is intuition. You feel there's something special here, and it starts with a feeling, and then you can go search what is it that makes this special. So I think both sides of the brain work very well together in that sense. And really, you should read the book. It's great.
Yeah, I'm going to buy it after that. You sold it very well. I'm convinced.
No relation with the author.
Chris, that topic that you brought about using the two sides of the brain, I think that this is the thing that people have to remember. It's a balance to find, and this balance has to be also trained and respected. You cannot just remove the human part of the people because you're a data guy, but you can also not accept as a data guy that the people are only driven by their guts. So your role as a data geek is to also sell your analysis, sell your data, and sell your information. And one of my favorite ways is, of course, storytelling, but there are so many ways to do that. You have to touch people in both sides of their brains so that they can be convinced by you. And that's, I think, what you have to remember from our conversation.
I used to be a teacher, and as a teacher, I had I had 16 hours in which I trained my students to make presentations, 16 hours to 20 hours. And the reason is very simple. Everything you do in life has to do with talking and convincing people with your words. And if you go to a job interview, you will have to convince that person who's on the other side, HR or whatever, to take you on. If you want a partner, you will have to convince that boy or girl to become your partner. You will always do that by talking. You will not write a letter and I'm your new I'm your new partner.
Look at the data.
Yeah, look at the data. So I think it's very important. And as you say, presenting the data itself is a soft skill, which is extremely, extremely important, because the way in which you present the data will, for a big part, define the outcome.
And I think that's the best take that we have of our conversation, right?
Yep. And I really enjoyed it.
Me too. That was great.